My name is Sarah Anderson. And before anyone accuses me of marrying for money, let me say this clearly. When I fell in love, I didn't fall in love with wealth. I fell in love with a man who never talked about it. That alone should have warned me. I met Daniel Anderson in the most ordinary way possible. No grand entrances. No luxury cars. No expensive suits. He was quiet, polite, almost painfully reserved. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke and smiled like he was always holding something back. We met at a mutual friend's small gathering. Nothing fancy. Plastic chairs. Warm drinks. Loud laughter. Daniel sat in the corner, observing, not trying to impress anyone. That night, when he walked me to my car, he apologized for not being very interesting. I laughed. I like quiet, I told him. Quiet feels safe. If only I had known. Our relationship moved slowly, deliberately. Daniel never rushed anything. He didn't talk much about his family, and when I asked, he gave simple answers. They're established, he would say. That was the word he used. Established. I thought it meant comfortable. Maybe middle class. Maybe old money that didn't like showing off. I didn't realize it meant power. It wasn't until the night he proposed that I truly understood what I was marrying into. He took me to dinner, a place I couldn't pronounce, let alone afford on my own. The staff treated him differently. Not warmly. Respectfully. Almost cautiously. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, my hands shook. I wasn't thinking about diamonds or status. I was thinking about how calm I felt with him. That was my mistake. The first warning. I met his family 2 weeks later. They lived in a house that didn't look impressive from the outside. No gates. No guards. No flashy design. But once you stepped inside, you felt it. The silence. Not peaceful silence. Controlled silence. The walls were lined with art I didn't recognize, but I knew it was expensive by the way it was displayed. Spaced, intentional, untouchable. Everything in that house felt deliberate, like it was placed to remind you that you were a guest. Daniel's father, Richard Anderson, was still alive then. He didn't stand to greet me. He simply looked at me. Not like a man meeting his son's fiancée. Like a man assessing a transaction. So, he said finally. You're Sarah. Yes, sir. He nodded once, then looked away. That was the entire conversation. His mother, Margaret Anderson, hugged me briefly. Her perfume was expensive and cold. She smiled the way people smile when they already know the ending of a story you're still excited about. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. I tried to fill the space with conversation. About work, about travel, about books. Margaret responded politely. Richard didn't respond at all. Daniel sat stiffly beside me, his hand resting on my knee, squeezing gently whenever the silence grew heavy. Later that night, when we left, I asked him if they liked me. He hesitated. They don't need to like you, he said. They just need to accept you. I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. What they never said. We married 6 months later. The wedding was elegant but restrained. No media. No announcements. No show. That alone should have told me something was off. People with money usually want to display it. The Andersons didn't. They preferred invisibility. After the wedding, Daniel moved me into a home that was already furnished. Everything chosen. Everything perfect. Everything untouched. It didn't feel like a home someone built with love. It felt like a place prepared in advance. Sometimes, late at night, I would walk through the house and feel like I was trespassing in my own life. Daniel noticed. You okay? He would ask. Yes, I'd lie. Because what was I supposed to say? Your life feels pre-written. The rules I was never given. Over time, I learned there were rules in the Anderson family. No one told me outright. You just learned by doing something wrong. Rule 1. You don't ask about money. Rule 2. You don't discuss family matters outside the family. Rule 3. You never contradict Richard Anderson. When I once asked Daniel what his father did for a living, he paused longer than usual. Investments, he said. What kind? Enough. That was the end of the conversation. Family gatherings were rare. When they happened, they felt more like meetings than celebrations. People spoke carefully, laughed softly, watched each other. I noticed something strange. Everyone deferred to Richard, even adults who were clearly successful in their own right. It wasn't respect. It was fear disguised as tradition. The day everything shifted. 3 years into our marriage, Richard Anderson died. Suddenly. Quietly. The news didn't break anywhere. There were no headlines. No articles. No public mourning. Just a phone call. Daniel stood in the kitchen holding his phone, his face drained of color. "My father is gone," he said. I reached for him. He didn't cry. That was the first time I felt afraid. The funeral was private. Closed. Only family. I noticed something else that day. People who had never acknowledged me before suddenly paid attention. They looked at me differently. Not warmly. Not kindly. Calculating. Like I had just stepped onto a chessboard I didn't know existed. That night, Daniel's mother spoke words I will never forget. "There will be a reading of the will," she said calmly. "Everyone must attend." Then she looked directly at me. "And Sarah, you too." Her tone wasn't inviting. It was final. That was when I realized something important. Whatever Richard Anderson left behind, it wasn't just money. And whatever was written in that will, I was part of it. Whether I wanted to be or not. If you've never been present at the reading of a will, let me tell you something most people don't talk about. It's not dramatic in the way movies show it. There's no shouting. No sudden fainting. No grand gasps. What there is tension. The kind that tightens your chest and makes you aware of every breath you take. We gathered 3 days after Richard Anderson was buried. Not at a lawyer's office. Not at a courthouse. But at the family estate. That alone felt intentional. Margaret insisted. "This is how Richard would have wanted it," she said. Her voice was steady. Too steady. The living room had been rearranged. Chairs placed in a half circle. A small table in the center held a thin black folder. That folder felt heavier than anything I'd ever seen. Everyone sat quietly. Daniel beside me. Margaret across the room. Several relatives I barely knew. Uncles, cousins, people who suddenly felt very important. And me. The outsider. The lawyer arrived exactly on time. A man named Thomas Keller. Middle-aged. Expressionless. He carried himself like someone who had heard worse secrets than ours. He didn't waste time. "Richard Anderson was very specific," he began. "This will must be read exactly as written." Margaret nodded. No one objected. That was the first sign that this wasn't a normal inheritance. The wealth they never talked about. The first part was expected. Properties. Accounts. Investments. The numbers were staggering. Even though no one reacted, I felt my stomach turn. This wasn't comfort. This was generational power. And yet, no one smiled. No one whispered. No one looked relieved. They all looked tense. That's when I realized something terrifying. They weren't waiting to see what they would receive. They were waiting to see what it would cost. Margaret's turn. When Margaret's name was read, she didn't react. Not surprise. Not grief. Just acknowledgement. She already knew. She had always known. She received control of the estate. Temporarily. With conditions. I noticed the word conditions appear again and again. Conditional ownership. Conditional access. Conditional authority. This was not a gift. It was a leash. Then Daniel's name was read. My heart started pounding. I felt his hand tighten around mine. Daniel Anderson, the lawyer said, is named primary beneficiary, provided all stipulations are met. There it was again. Provided. Margaret glanced at me. Just once. And in that glance, I felt something cold crawl up my spine. When my name was spoken, I wasn't prepared. I don't know why. Maybe because no one ever prepared me for the idea that I mattered in this family. Sarah Anderson. The room shifted. Every eye turned to me. I felt my face burn. Sarah Anderson is included in this will under a specific clause. My heart started racing so fast I thought I might pass out. Daniel looked at me, confused. Margaret didn't. The lawyer cleared his throat. This clause applies only as long as Sarah Anderson remains. He paused. I hated that pause. Compliant with the family's conditions. The word compliant hit me like a slap. What does that mean? I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. The lawyer looked to Margaret. Margaret nodded slowly. It means, the lawyer continued, that certain expectations must be upheld in order for Daniel Anderson to retain full access to his inheritance. I turned to Daniel. Did you know about this? He shook his head. I swear, Sarah. I didn't. I believed him. That made it worse. The conditions they never explained. The lawyer didn't explain the conditions in detail. Not yet. He simply said they would be outlined privately. Privately. That word echoed in my head. Because private meant control. Private meant silence. Private meant I wouldn't have witnesses. The reading ended shortly after. No arguments. No questions. Everyone stood up and began leaving, as if this was all normal. I remained seated. My legs wouldn't move. Margaret approached me slowly. You look overwhelmed, she said softly. I forced a smile. I didn't expect to be part of any of this. She placed a hand over mine. Her touch was light, possessive. You married into this family, she said. That comes with responsibilities. Responsibilities. That word tasted bitter. The first warning. That night, after everyone left, Margaret asked to speak with me alone. Daniel objected. I should be there, he said. Margaret smiled at him, the kind of smile that looked warm but wasn't. This is between the women of the family, she replied. Something about that made my stomach drop. I followed Margaret into her study. She closed the door. Then she locked it. Let me be very clear, Sarah, she said calmly. The inheritance is not a reward. I stayed silent. It is a structure, she continued. One that keeps this family intact. What does that have to do with me? I asked. She studied my face carefully before answering. You are the variable, she said. And in that moment, I finally understood. The will wasn't about money. It was about control. And somehow, I was the leverage. Margaret didn't sit down. She remained standing behind her desk, her hands resting lightly on its polished surface, as if grounding herself in authority. I stayed where I was, heart pounding, waiting for her to say something that would finally make sense of the knot forming in my chest. She didn't rush. People like Margaret never do. The Anderson family, she began, has survived for generations because we understand one thing. I said nothing. Money doesn't protect a family, she continued. Control does. The words settled into the room like smoke. I don't understand, I said carefully. What does any of this have to do with me? Margaret finally sat down. Her eyes never left mine. You were not chosen by accident, Sarah. That sentence changed everything. Why I was accepted. I felt a strange wave of heat rush through me. Daniel chose me, I said, more to reassure myself than to convince her. Margaret smiled faintly. Yes, she said. But we allowed it. The way she emphasized we made my skin crawl. The Anderson family has always been selective, she continued. Bloodlines matter. Appearances matter. Stability matters. I'm not sure what you're implying, I said. You're calm, she replied. You're discreet. You don't ask too many questions. And most importantly, she paused. You're loyal. Loyal. I thought of all the times I had defended Daniel. The times I had swallowed my doubts. The times I had ignored my instincts for the sake of peace. Margaret had been watching all along. You fit, she said simply. Not loved. Not welcomed. Fitted. The compliance clause. She opened a thin folder and slid a single page across the desk toward me. This, she said, is the clause that concerns you. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The language was formal, legal, cold. It stated that Daniel's inheritance would remain intact only if certain family standards were upheld within the marriage. Standards. There it was again. What standards? I asked quietly. Margaret leaned back. Privacy, she said. Discretion. Unity. Each word felt heavier than the last. And if I don't meet these standards? I asked. Her expression hardened. Then the inheritance dissolves. I stared at her. You would punish your own son financially because of me? No, she corrected calmly. I would protect the family. The distinction chilled me. What they expected of me. Margaret began listing expectations as if she were reading from a manual. I was not to discuss family matters with outsiders. I was to refrain from social media presence involving the family. I was to attend events when required. I was to present a unified front, at all times. And children? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret studied me for a long moment. That, she said, is also addressed. My chest tightened. Any children born into this family must be raised according to our values. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she replied, they belong to the family before they belong to you. I felt dizzy. That was no longer an inheritance clause. That was ownership. The silent threat. I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Does Daniel know any of this? Margaret's lips pressed together. He doesn't need to, she said. Not yet. The room seemed to tilt. You're asking me to keep secrets from my husband, I said. I'm asking you to protect him, she replied smoothly. From knowledge that would only burden him. I realized then that Margaret believed her own justifications. That made her dangerous. This family has endured because we don't allow emotion to interfere with structure, she continued. You would do well to remember that. I stood up slowly. I need time, I said. Margaret nodded. You have it, she replied. As long as you remain reasonable. Reasonable. Another word that sounded like a threat. What I didn't tell Daniel. That night, Daniel asked me what Margaret had said. I lied. I told him she was explaining legal technicalities. I told him everything was fine. I told him I was just tired. He believed me. Because he trusted me. That trust weighed heavier than the inheritance ever could. I lay awake long after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, replaying Margaret's words in my mind. You were not chosen by accident. I wondered how many decisions in my life had been mine. And how many had been allowed. The realization. I finally understood what the clause truly meant. It wasn't about compliance. It was about silence. As long as I stayed quiet. As long as I didn't challenge the family. As long as I didn't disrupt their carefully controlled image. Everything would be fine. For them. But for me. I was living inside a contract I never signed. And contracts like that only end one way. For days after my conversation with Margaret, I moved through the house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Every hallway felt monitored. Every conversation felt measured. Even silence felt watched. I started noticing things I had dismissed before. Staff members who never spoke unless spoken to. Doors that were always locked. Rooms I had never been invited into. This house wasn't a home. It was a system. And I was now inside it. The first test. The first test came quietly. Margaret invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. She chose a private restaurant, elegant, discreet, the kind where people paid extra for privacy. As soon as we sat down, she smiled warmly at the waiter. Then her eyes returned to me. "I hear you've been speaking with your sister again," she said casually. My heart skipped. I hadn't told her that. "Yes," I replied carefully. "We talk regularly." Margaret nodded. "Of course," she said. "Family matters." She stirred her drink slowly. "What do you share with her?" The question wasn't curious. It was evaluative. "Nothing inappropriate," I said. Margaret's lips curved slightly. "Good," she replied. "Because it would be unfortunate if misunderstandings reached the wrong ears." There it was. The warning. Isolation by design. After that lunch, invitations stopped. No more casual dinners. No more family gatherings where I could fade into the background. Instead, I received instructions. Which events to attend. What to wear. Who to sit beside. Even Daniel noticed. "They're involving you more," he said one evening. "It's a good sign." I smiled. Because telling him the truth would have sounded insane. The more involved I became, the more isolated I felt. Every conversation was controlled. Every smile rehearsed. I realized then, isolation wasn't a side effect. It was the point. The day I broke a rule. The breaking point came unexpectedly. I met an old friend for coffee, someone who knew me before the Anderson name. We talked about normal things. Work. Life. Memories. For an hour, I felt human again. That evening, Margaret called. "I hope you enjoyed your afternoon," she said calmly. My stomach dropped. "How did you?" "You forget," she interrupted gently. "This family values awareness." The word felt obscene. "I didn't say anything," I insisted. "I know," she replied. This time. The pause that followed was deliberate. But perception matters just as much as truth. I hung up shaking. The confrontation with Daniel. That night, I finally cracked. "Do you ever feel like your family controls everything?" I asked Daniel. He laughed softly. "They're just structured," he said. "They've always been like that. They monitor people," I said. "They watch." Daniel frowned. "You're overthinking it," he replied. "They're protective, not controlling." Protective. Margaret's favorite word. I wanted to scream. Instead, I swallowed the truth again. Because the inheritance wasn't just leverage over me. It was leverage over him. What I discovered by accident. A week later, I stumbled upon something I was never meant to see. I was looking for a document Daniel had misplaced when I noticed a locked drawer slightly ajar in his father's old study. Inside was a ledger. Names. Dates. Conditions. I flipped through it slowly, my hands trembling. It listed family members. Spouses. Even former spouses. And beside each name. Notes. Non-compliant. Removed. Settled. My breath caught. This wasn't new. This was a pattern. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last. The moment I realized the truth. That night, I sat alone in the bedroom, staring at the ledger. Margaret wasn't protecting the family. She was curating it. Removing threats. Erasing resistance. The inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a filter. And I was being tested. The question wasn't whether I could comply. It was whether I would survive long enough if I didn't. I didn't sleep that night. The ledger lay hidden beneath my clothes, buried so deep in the closet that even I struggled to find it again. But I didn't need to see it. The names were already burned into my mind. Women like me. Some listed only by first name. Some crossed out. Some marked with quiet finality. Settled. I wondered what that word meant in Margaret's language. Divorce. Disappearance. Silence bought with money. Or something worse. The weight of knowing. Daniel slept peacefully beside me. That hurt the most. He had no idea that his inheritance, his future, rested on my obedience. That his mother had turned our marriage into collateral. I stared at him in the dark and wondered if telling him the truth would destroy him. Or save us both. Margaret had been right about one thing. Knowledge was a burden. And now I was carrying it alone. Margaret's final warning. 2 days later, Margaret requested another meeting. This time, she didn't pretend it was casual. Her study felt colder than before. More deliberate. "You've been unsettled," she said calmly. "I can sense it." I said nothing. "You've seen something you shouldn't have," she continued. My heart slammed against my ribs. "There's no point denying it," she added. "This house reveals itself eventually." She folded her hands. "What matters now," she said, "is how you proceed." "Proceed with what?" I asked quietly. "With your role," she replied. There it was. No illusions left. The offer. Margaret leaned forward. "If you accept the structure," she said, "your life will be comfortable, secure, protected." "And if I don't?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was softer. "Then Daniel will lose everything," she said. "And you will be blamed." That was the cruelty of it. I wouldn't be punished directly. He would. "You'll be remembered," she continued, "as the woman who couldn't adapt." Adapt. Another word that meant surrender. The moment I almost gave in. For a brief moment, I considered it. Silence. Comfort. Stability. All I had to do was become smaller. Quieter. Invisible. I thought of future children raised under Margaret's watchful eye. Of a life where every choice required approval. Of smiling while slowly disappearing. Something inside me hardened. The decision I didn't speak aloud. "I need time," I said. Margaret nodded. "You don't have much," she replied. I left her study knowing something had shifted. I wasn't being evaluated anymore. I was being timed. What I did next. That night, I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't expose Margaret. I did something far more dangerous. I started documenting everything. Dates. Conversations. Patterns. I copied the ledger. I backed it up. I prepared for a future where silence would no longer protect me. Because I finally understood the truth. The inheritance didn't own me. Fear did. And fear only works as long as you let it. The threat I felt coming. As I lay in bed, listening to the quiet hum of the house, one thought echoed louder than the rest. Margaret would not forgive resistance. She would escalate. And when she did, she wouldn't come for me directly. She would come through Daniel. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten me. She didn't need to. The change happened quietly, the most dangerous way possible. It started with Daniel. At first, it was subtle. He became distant. Less affectionate. More distracted. When I asked if something was wrong, he brushed it off. "Work," he said. "Family stuff." But I knew better. Margaret was speaking to him. Just not in ways I could hear. One morning, Daniel mentioned casually that his access to certain accounts had been delayed. "Temporary issue," he said. "Mother's handling it." I felt cold. That wasn't a technical problem. That was a message. Margaret wasn't punishing me. She was reminding me who paid the price. Soon after, Daniel started questioning me. Not aggressively, carefully. Have you been stressed lately? He asked one evening. Yes, I admitted. Do you think you might be misinterpreting things? He continued. There it was. Margaret's voice, filtered through his mouth. I realized then, she wasn't just controlling the inheritance. She was shaping the narrative. One afternoon, Daniel told me he had a family meeting. Just internal matters, he said. Nothing for you to worry about. The exclusion hurt more than anger would have. When he returned, he was different. Quieter. Guarded. Almost distant. What was it about? I asked. He hesitated. Legal stuff, he replied. Mother's reorganizing things. I nodded. But inside, panic bloomed. Staff interactions changed. Politeness became formality. Warmth disappeared. I felt like a suspect moving through a crime scene. Margaret hadn't isolated me physically. She had isolated me socially. And it was working. That night, a note appeared on my nightstand. No signature. Just 5 words. This does not end well. My hands shook as I read it. Margaret had crossed a line. This was no longer psychological pressure. This was intimidation. I confronted Daniel the next morning. Is your mother trying to turn you against me? I asked. He looked startled. Why would you say that? Because you're changing, I replied. Because things are being taken from you. He exhaled sharply. She's concerned about us, he said. About stability. That's her word, I snapped. Not yours. Silence fell between us. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Margaret didn't need to remove me. She just needed to make me look unstable. Once that happened, the family would do the rest. I wasn't fighting a person. I was fighting a system designed to erase me. And systems don't stop on their own. Fear has a strange way of sharpening your mind. Once I accepted that silence was no longer protecting me, something inside me changed. I stopped reacting. I started planning. I documented everything. Every call from Margaret. Every shift in Daniel's behavior. Every restriction disguised as concern. I dated it all. I backed it up. I sent copies to places Margaret would never think to look. Because control only works when information stays centralized. And I was done being centralized. One afternoon, while Margaret was away, I returned to the study. The same drawer. The same ledger. But this time, I noticed something I'd missed before. A separate section. Older. Thicker. Inside were letters. Handwritten. From women whose names matched the ledger. Spouses. Ex-spouses. Some pleading. Some apologizing. Some warning whoever found them. One letter stopped me cold. It mentioned a settlement. Not financial, but legal. A forced agreement. Silence in exchange for access to children. My stomach turned. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was about coercion. I wasn't alone. Not completely. One of the long-time household staff, Elena, hesitated one evening before leaving the room. You should be careful, she whispered. That was all she said. But her eyes said more. She knew. They all knew. Margaret didn't just control the family. She controlled loyalty. And loyalty was enforced through fear. I decided to test the system. I reached out carefully to one of the women listed as settled. She responded. Briefly. Cryptically. But enough. You're not imagining it. Protect yourself. Do not confront Margaret alone. I deleted the messages immediately. But the confirmation changed everything. I wasn't paranoid. I was targeted. Daniel began asking questions. Small ones. Why were certain accounts frozen? Why were decisions being made without him? Why was everything conditional? Margaret's control wasn't seamless anymore. Cracks were forming. and cracks let light in. Margaret confronted me that evening. "You've been looking where you shouldn't," she said calmly. I met her gaze. "I know what you've done," I replied. Her smile didn't falter. "What you think you know," she corrected. But something had shifted. She no longer held certainty. And Margaret without certainty was dangerous. For the first time I was ready. Ready to tell Daniel. Ready to expose the structure. Ready to accept whatever came next. Because fear loses its power the moment you choose truth. And I had already chosen. There is no perfect moment to tell someone that their life has been carefully engineered without their consent. There is only the moment when silence becomes more destructive than truth. That moment came for me on a quiet evening, when the house felt too still, like it was holding its breath. Daniel was sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. I closed the door behind me. "We need to talk," I said. He looked up. "Is this about my mother?" he asked. That was the first crack. "Yes," I replied. "But it's also about us." He sighed. "She's been under a lot of pressure," he said. "The estate." "She's controlling you," I interrupted. "And she's using me to do it." He frowned. "Sarah, you're starting to sound." I placed the documents on the bed. The ledger copies. The letters. The timelines. He fell silent. Daniel read slowly. At first, he looked confused. Then defensive. Then angry. Finally, hollow. "This can't be real," he said. "It is," I replied. "And it's been happening long before me." He looked at the names. The notes. The conditions. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I know," I said. "That's why it worked." "What hurts isn't just what she did," Daniel said quietly. "It's that she never trusted me." "That's the system," I replied. "Trust isn't allowed." He closed the ledger. "They turned my marriage into a transaction," he said. I nodded. "And they expected me to disappear quietly," I added. Daniel looked at me. "Not as a son. Not as an heir. But as a husband." "We don't comply," he said. That sentence felt like oxygen. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Because this won't be clean." He nodded. "I'd rather lose everything than live like this." For the first time since the will was read, I felt hope. She called within hours. "I trust you've had a conversation," she said calmly. "Yes," Daniel replied. Silence. Then, "That was unwise." "No," Daniel said. "It was necessary." Her control was slipping. And she knew it. "You're making a mistake," Margaret said. "This family does not forgive defiance." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Neither do we," he replied. The call ended. And with it, the illusion of safety. That night, Daniel held my hand as we lay awake. "She's going to retaliate," he said. "I know," I replied. "But she won't be able to erase us anymore." Because the truth had been spoken. And once spoken, it refuses to disappear. Margaret didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She did something far worse. She withdrew. And when Margaret withdrew, systems moved. It started with emails. Legal language. Cold phrasing. Immediate effect. Daniel's access to family accounts was suspended. Trust privileges revoked. Board positions under review. I watched the color drain from his face as he read. "She's cutting me off," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "Because she's lost control." Calls went unanswered. Messages unread. Relatives who once smiled politely now avoided us entirely. We were no longer inconvenient. We were contaminated. Margaret didn't need to convince them. She just needed to signal. The story moved fast. I heard it whispered before it reached me directly. I was unstable. Manipulative. A threat to family unity. Daniel had been influenced. That was her greatest weapon. Not lies. Reframing. Because the truth doesn't matter when perception is managed. One evening, we returned home to find the locks changed. Not all of them. Just enough. A quiet message. We were still allowed inside. But no longer trusted. The house no longer felt like ours. It felt like a holding area. Margaret requested a meeting. One last attempt. She sat across from us, composed. "This doesn't have to end badly," she said. "Define badly," I replied. She ignored me. "Daniel," she said gently, "step away from this conflict. We can repair your position." "And my wife?" he asked. Margaret paused. "That depends on her willingness to disengage." There it was. The erasure clause. Daniel stood. "This conversation is over," he said. Margaret's eyes hardened. "So be it," she replied. Within days, everything changed. Our accounts froze. Our access restricted. Our names quietly removed from circles we once belonged to. The inheritance was gone. But so was the illusion that it had ever been ours. I expected rage. I expected grief. What I felt instead was clarity. Without the weight of their expectations, I could finally breathe. They had taken everything they could control. But they had also revealed themselves. And that knowledge was power. Losing everything is supposed to feel like the end of the world. That's what Margaret counted on. But what she never understood was this. Some things only become clear once they're gone. We left the house quietly. No confrontation. No dramatic exit. Just suitcases and silence. The estate that once felt suffocating disappeared behind us. For the first time in months, I felt air in my lungs that wasn't filtered through fear. The days that followed were uncertain. Smaller apartment. Simpler routines. No safety net. But something unexpected happened. Daniel began to come back to himself. Not the heir. Not the extension of Margaret's will. Just a man. Just my husband. We made choices without asking anyone's approval. And every choice felt radical. Weeks later, a letter arrived. From Margaret. No apology. Just acknowledgement. "You made your decision," it read. "So have we." The family was moving on. So were we. I lost wealth. I lost status. I lost access. But I kept my voice. I kept my autonomy. And most importantly, I kept my marriage. That was the part Margaret never anticipated. Power built on fear always collapses. It just takes time. I don't know what will happen to the Anderson fortune. I don't care. Because the Rayol inheritance was never money. It was the lesson. Control is expensive. And freedom is priceless. I'm telling this because silence protects systems, not people. Because wealth that demands obedience is not wealth, it's a cage. And because if you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own life, you're not alone. I married into wealth. But I walked away with truth. And that was the price worth paying.